Hey guys, sevenstop here. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about how to learn grammar. This bad boy right here. And as an immersion learner, if you even need to study grammar at all, and what resources to use. So don't worry, I'll answer all of your questions about this topic by the end of the video, and I will be sharing the best resources to learn, so make sure to stick around. My name is sevenstop. I've been learning Japanese for 5 years. I passed the N1 with a near perfect score through the hardcore Japanese immersion method AJAT. And in my learning journey, I've tried an extensive list of grammar learning methods. Let's get right into it, and stay tuned to find out why I'm standing out here. So when you think about grammar, you probably think about it as a different facet of the language. Things like sentence structure, particles, word order, and that kind of stuff. But what if I told you it's not really the case? So when you're learning Japanese, there are really 3 types of grammar, 3 different kinds of grammar that you need to be concerned about. And just so you know, this is a practical framework. I just made it up. It's not based on linguistics or science or anything like that. This is just based on my personal experience, but people who have learned Japanese can probably relate. The first and most fundamental type of grammar is what I like to call intangible grammar. Cool name, isn't it? And as the name would suggest, these are grammatical concepts that represent an abstract element of the language. For example, one of the most basic intangible grammar ideas, and probably one of the first things you learn, is word order. You're probably already somewhat familiar with this, but English is an SVO language. Therefore, we say, the drug addict stabbed me. Whereas in Japanese, you would say, the drug addict me stabbed. Kind of like this. Because it's an SOV language. Although I hope you don't have to say that very often. Another example would be the idea that different parts of speech exist in your target language. For example, Japanese has particles, but we don't really have that in English. The second type of grammar is tangible structural grammar. So this is structural grammar represented in the sentence by an actual word like wa or ga or ni particles in Japanese. These constructions are essential parts of Japanese, and they often have really complicated nuances that can only be acquired through thousands of hours of natural input in the language. But they're the foundation of every Japanese sentence. Despite the fact that it will take a really long time to fully acquire the nuance of these patterns, you'll probably encounter most of them in your first week learning Japanese. When most people imagine grammar, they think about stuff like sentence order and particles, but this only makes up a small portion of the total, quote-unquote grammar you'll have to learn in order to understand Japanese. That's because most of grammar is actually just regular words. In fact, the vast majority of grammatical structures are just regular words. The kind of words that you can put in the dictionary and just look them up. And in fact, most people don't know this, but even typical Japanese conjugations that we think of are really just suffixes attaching to a base component. For example, if we say
食べた
ate, this is actually the base form called renyoke plus the auxiliary verb ta, kind of like this. Concepts like this can be a little abstract to understand as a beginner, but what I'm trying to get across is that if you're studying with immersion, and we know immersion is the only way to acquire a foreign language to high level proficiency, you rarely need to think about grammar as a separate concept from anything else. You don't need to do very much special study. Okay guys, so I just wanted to give you a real example with real Japanese. Let's say that I'm watching this show here.
フライト中に電流のスイッチ入れられたら
So you see here, she said,
入れられたら
this is like a conjugation. Traditionally, you would call it, a conjugation. Comes from rareru. But if I look this up in the dictionary, you can actually see that this has an entry as a word in the dictionary, even in the English dictionary and in the Japanese dictionary. So you can actually fully learn grammar through the dictionary as if it was a normal word. So now that you understand how this works, let's get into how to take advantage of this to learn Japanese better, more efficiently, and also how everyone is messing up grammar study. So most people think you learn grammar through things like drills. Here's what I think of drills. Classes. Here's what I think of classes. And textbooks. It's like this bad baby. There we go. There we go. Let that bad baby burn. It's real unfortunate, I have to admit. I love Genki as much as the next guy. Sit. it is a real shame that I had to burn Genki. It was for the sake of the video, guys. And here we've got the remains of Genki. I didn't let it burn all the way because like I might actually cause a fire and that would be a problem. But in all seriousness, if you've ever taken a language class before, which you probably have, traditional learning views grammar, the structure of the language, and words, the building blocks of the language, as things that need to be learned separately. But the reality is this is mostly overcomplicating things, and most grammar can be learned the same as words. You don't need two methods, you only need one. And luckily we already have that method, and it's called immersion, which you hopefully know about. If you don't, I recommend you look into immersion learning. And in fact, out of all the aspects of learning a language, grammar is actually the one that is made most trivial in comparison to the traditional skills building approach by immersion. This is why it always confused me when I heard immersion learners talk about learning grammar as if it was a separate thing. Like I remember a few years back, I saw some immersion learners talking on a Discord server about how they thought they needed to do textbook study on grammar to get better when they had already been immersing for years. And I was like, why would you do that when we already have the best method ever? Like, why are we going back in time here? Really, we don't need to do that. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. I then engaged them in a wonderful discussion, which of course resulted in everyone feeling great afterwards. NANI? Now, of course, telling someone to immerse with no grammar context whatsoever is not recommended. Here's how you should go about it. I'm going to explain it all now. First of all, you should be trying to avoid conscious study as much as possible. Every time you try to use your brain to analyze and reason about the language, this is potentially creating unnatural pathways and habits in your brain. The language is far too nuanced and complex to learn by thinking about it, by using logical reasoning. So you actually want to use your unconscious mind. The more you reason about Japanese and English, the further you get from actually accurately acquiring grammar. When you start learning Japanese, you want to start out by reviewing a basic grammar guide. Any will do. The fastest and most well-known is Tai Kim. I recommend you just skim it. You don't need to focus on trying to understand the minutia. And if you feel bored or uncomfortable reading a text guide, feel free to use a video guide of some sort. Like for example, Japanese Ammo with Misa is another one. It doesn't really matter. You just want to go through it. Don't focus on it too much. And just get a basic idea. Here's the structures in the language. And here's where I go if I want to know more. You might already know this part. Note that Tai Kim is not necessarily the most accurate grammar guide, but it's fast, it's quick and dirty, it gets the job done, and it just teaches you the basic idea of what structures are available in the language. So if you use Cure Dolly, for example, Cure Dolly is much more accurate. That's how Japanese people perceive it. But Tai Kim is a little bit easier and more approachable, I feel, because it explains things in a less abstract way. But Cure Dolly is also a great way to learn grammar. So when you are reviewing the grammar guide and when you are immersing and you see a grammar structure, I recommend that you not make Anki cards for grammar. This goes for all three types of grammar that I mentioned before. The nuance of these structures is very specific and it can't be easily understood through conscious effort. Even if you memorize explanations, they're likely to be highly inaccurate, and it could result in you developing an unnatural understanding biased by the explanation in your own native language, English. If you memorize grammar through Anki, that's not so much different from a traditional approach. You really want to acquire it naturally, like natives do. Instead, you should reference the grammar guide or resource only when necessary, and try to avoid looking things up or reasoning through them in your mind as much as possible. To some extent, it can't be helped, but we want to minimize it as much as possible. For this process of referencing, there are several resources that you can use. Cure Dolly is a great one because Cure Dolly gives you an accurate understanding of Japanese grammar as Japanese people understand it. You can use Tai Kim that you already reviewed at some point most likely, or you could even use ChatGPT. This is actually a pretty powerful technique. ChatGPT can describe the role of grammar or some word or almost anything in a sentence and maybe make it a little bit easier to understand. But if you're interested, when I was learning Japanese, we didn't have this stuff. So I used Tai Kim and I used the Dictionary of Japanese Grammar series. So there's like beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I would find the structure in there and look it up when I wanted to know it, and then go back to immersion. And eventually you'll pick up on grammar probably pretty quickly if you're immersing quite a bit, and you won't have to do this anymore. If you're serious about immersion, like maybe doing 3 or 4 hours of passive immersion a day, I would expect to encounter most grammar forms within the first year. I also think it's totally okay to just look things up in the dictionary because it is basically just a word. It's a word with a complicated nuance. But a lot of the times you can just look it up in the dictionary, look up grammar in the dictionary, and it will pretty much make sense or give you a rough understanding. And all you need is a rough understanding because you just want to, understand basically what it does, and then you'll pick up the rest through immersion. And sometimes it's going to feel impossible, like you can't even wrap your head around it. I know when I was first immersing, I wrote some sentences down on my Google Doc that I mined, and I remember I had so much trouble understanding them. But now if I look back on it, it just makes perfect sense. So your unconscious mind will figure it out for you. You have to trust the process and know that it will eventually work. You just have to stick to it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Have a great day. I had a lot of fun making it. Bye guys.
Make sure to smash that like button. Ensure that you pulverize the subscription button. And please obliterate the notification bell. And finally, follow my Instagram, please. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, guys. Sevenstop out.